Hello, and welcome to the OK Preps Extra Show. It's Tuesday, October 15th. I'm Patrick Prince, joined as always by Barry Lewis. We're going to talk a little high school football and maybe get into the other fall sports later on. But Barry, let's start with Malaki-Dillard's catch during the Jinx game last Friday. An unbelievable catch. I don't know if I've ever seen a better high school catch than that. What did you think?
It was incredible. I was at the Bixby game, so I did not see Malachi's catch live, but I saw the video of it. And wow, what a video it was. That was pretty eye-popping. It's hard to imagine a better catch than that, as far as like just being spectacular uh, grab that he made. So that's going to be one to remember.
Yeah,
And
it was like,
it also just shows you his incredible talent. There was a reason going into the season that I had him ranked number 3 on the preseason receivers list in the area. And it's been a little perplexing early in the year. And everyone has asked what's wrong with Jenks and why is their offense struggling. And going into the season, I had Caleb Barnett as the number 1 receiver for Jenks. Of all the receivers in the area. And then I had Malaki-Dillard as number 3. Thought these would be 2 big additions to their passing attack. And it really hadn't worked out that way, at least through the first 4 or 5 games. Caleb Barnett finally had his breakout game in week 5. And maybe that's the breakout moment for Malaki-Dillard last week. Remember, it takes some time for players, as even though they're incredibly talented, to make the transition sometimes to a new program. And that's what you had with both of these players moving over to Jenks late in the spring. And that's why when people were thinking, is Jenks not really very good this year? And I was saying they haven't really tapped to their reached their full, they haven't come close to realizing their full potential. There's still plenty more improvement that they can make. And I was thinking about those two because Caleb Barnett really hadn't been a part of a game plan any week until week 5. And then you saw what he could do with 2 big touchdown catches. And then last week, until last week, I thought Malaki-Dillard had been really underused by Jenks as someone I think is one of the best receivers around. I really didn't think they had taken full advantage of his receiving ability. So maybe that's going to change now, because when I think you've got those 2 guys on the field at the same time, that's a pretty dynamite combination for Owen Jones to throw to. And then you've got arguably the state's best running back, KD Jones, who had a big week last week too against Mustang. Then you've got a lot of offensive weapons there. So I think there's a lot of room for offensive growth for Jenks, and they're just starting to tap into that potential that they have, and that makes them potentially very dangerous as you head into the postseason.
The Trojans have 6-0 Edmond Deer Creek this Thursday. That game is at Jinx. This is one of those interesting East Side, West Side matchups, Barry, where you have a 3-3, dangerous Jinx team versus an undefeated West Side team. Jinx has had a couple of those just in the last couple of weeks. How do you see this one?
Well, as I indicated in my column, we'll know if Deer Creek is for real. I'm going into the season. I heard a lot of good things about Deer Creek, but their schedule hasn't been near the type. The schedule's been okay that Deer Creek's played, but they haven't played near the type of schedule that Jenks or the local 6A1 teams, other local 6A1 teams in the Tulsa area played. So this is going to be Deer Creek's first trip outside of the Edmond, Oklahoma City area. And it'll be interesting to see how they fare. Because as I wrote, history is littered with teams with glossy records coming over to Jenks, which has had a lesser record, and Jenks winds up winning. Now there have been some recent breakthroughs in the last 5 years or so. So it's not impossible to win at Jenks, but it wouldn't surprise me if a 3-3 Jenks team defeats the 6-0 Deer Creek team. Similarly, as what we saw 2 weeks ago when Norman came in undefeated against Jenks, which was 1-3 and reeling with the 3-game losing streak, and Jenks wins pretty solidly 31-12. A bit of a warning sign from a Deer Creek standpoint is they only beat Moore by 10 I mean, that's a solid win. Moore's got a good team, but remember a couple weeks ago, that Bixby, that was a pretty hype game. Bixby and Moore, and Moore was undefeated, and Bixby just rolled them by 42 points. So if you look at those scores, you think, well, it's not going to be surprising if a 3-3 Jenks team beats a 6-0 Deer Creek team. But this is a chance for Deer Creek to make a statement, not only for Deer Creek, but for the West Side. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think Jenks is starting to, it looks like they're back on track. And I would be surprised if Jenks didn't pull off the quote upset.
Another marquee game this week, Barry. 4A number 1 Wagner hosting number 7 Cushing, and this is kind of the game on Wagner's schedule that many people kind of circled this year as being their first, what could be their first real true test of the season, and it has proven that it could be that because Wagner has just completely rolled over most people this year. How do you see this one?
I'm good. That's going to be the game I'm going to be at on Thursday. I've had it circled on my calendar too because I was at the last 2 Wagner Cushing games, and games that Wagner won by a combined total of 4 points. So I'm looking for a really good close game. I've only had one close game I've been at all year long, and that was the Backyard Bowl, which wasn't really a very good game until like the last 5 minutes. Then it got interesting. So I'm ready for a real good game. Cushing Wagner. Cushing gave Wagner all it wanted last year at Wagner. The game is again at Wagner this year. It was a 15-14 game last year, and the difference was Cushing kicked the extra point that could have tied instead of going for 2 and trying to tie the game at the end of the first half, thinking, hey, it's just the end of the first half. Let's not chase points. Long ways to go. And lo and behold, no one scored in the second half. So Wagner stayed up 15-14 and won the game. Cushing had its chances and didn't convert. So, and then of course, everyone remembers the 2022 state championship game where Wagner stunned Cushing 24-21 with a comeback after Cushing had given Wagner probably its worst loss of the Dale Condit era of the last 20 years earlier that year. So there's a lot of interesting storylines going into this game, Cushing at Wagner on Thursday night, but I would expect it would be Wagner's closest game this season. Although Wagner looks like such a juggernaut, it also wouldn't surprise me either if Wagner just won really handily because they look like a team on a mission.
They do, and there have been a couple of games this season that I thought might be, I wouldn't say a test, but like potentially had the potential to be a semi-close game, and they just haven't. Wagner's just rolled over people. What was interesting?
Remember last week we thought going into Wagner Catoosa is one of those that looked good on paper. Maybe that Catoosa could hang with them for a little while, but Wagner probably read that and wanted to make a statement, and it was just a blowout from the get-go. Wagner's also got a really interesting game coming up next week because they go up to Grove, which is ranked 5th. So 2 really tough games for Wagner in a row. And but that's good for Wagner. They need, because in the playoffs, you're going to have tough games in consecutive weeks. So that really gets you ready if you're playing your arguably the district's their 2 toughest opponents in back-to-back weeks.
Yeah. And they opened the offense up a little bit last week at Catoosa. They threw the ball downfield a little more than they'd done, and Cale Charbonneau had some really nice passes downfield. And I asked him about it after the game, and he just kind of simply put that it wasn't, they were trying to exploit a few of the matchups that they felt they could. So that was the reason why they did that. But it was good to see kind of the offense open up a little bit.
Yeah, it was interesting to see Cale's stats because on one hand, especially in these days where with high percentage passing, you'd say, look at his stats, his numbers, 13 of 30, and think that's not very good. But what did he get for his 13 completions, over 300 yards passing? So when you look at completion percentage, and sometimes you've got to put it all in context. Is he completing a lot of passes because they're all shovel passes, swing passes, really high percentage passes? There's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes the completion percentage can be misleading. Like you see a quarterback, and I thought that with Hawkins the other day for OU. It's like you looked at his completions and attempts and thought, oh, he's not having a bad day and he's not getting any yards on them because they're not throwing downfield. So the completion percentage a lot of times can be very misleading.
Last week, Barry, you were the only one on our picks panel to pick Pryor over Claremore. Claremore came into that game undefeated, yet you went with Pryor. Tell us about that pick.
Well, the year before, that was the warning sign from a Claremore standpoint. The fact that Pryor matched up really well last year with Claremore gave Claremore one of its toughest regular season matchups. Of course, Claremore went to the semifinals last year, and Claremore was fortunate to win 33-32 over Pryor last year. So I thought coming into this year, Pryor is a better team. Claremore, I don't think is quite as good as last year because last year set the standard high, although Claremore is really good. So why not a similar type of game? No, I did not expect Pryor to win by 25 points. That was a surprise, but I thought if Pryor could avoid an emotional hangover from a really tough loss against Tahlequah the previous week, then they would have a good chance against Claremore, which I thought I don't know if this was the case, but they could be looking past Pryor a little bit towards this week's game against Collinsville. So I think there's a lot of factors coming together. Pryor's playing really well, matches up well against Claremore. They've got probably have a lot of confidence after nearly beating Claremore last year. So that's why I gave Pryor a shot at pulling off the upset.
Barry, let's talk about the OSSAA for a second. So this was it last week or 2 weeks ago?
Last week with the
Last week,
eligibility.
the OSSAA granted eligibility to Claremore athlete Maddox-Mason after denying him on two previous occasions. They approved his eligibility by an 11-1 vote. So a real 180 there. What are the larger implications of this decision, Barry? Because to me, it just looks like another example of the OSSAA's dwindling authority. What do you think? I mean, is that fair of me to say, dwindling authority? Is that fair?
To some extent, yes. When you have the attorney general stepping in and chastising them and revoking a rule, they are forcing them basically to rescind a rule that they had instituted, then you've got to say, yes, there's some dwindling authority there. And on this case with Maddox-Mason, it's hard to tell because the OSSA does not comment on individual players' cases. So, but it would certainly, since that was sort of like one of the first major, quote, major decisions on an eligibility situation after they're dust up with the attorney general, it would you could certainly think that that is the case, that from an OSSA standpoint, it's like, do we really want to go on with this case? Is it really worth it? I mean, I think you sort of ran into that even before the attorney general ruling with the Caleb Barnett situation, perhaps, which I think was a totally different situation. But again, each of those situations had a lot of unique qualities to them.
Yeah.
So I guess it's something we won't know for sure until we see more eligibility appeals being decided. And if we see more of them being approved, especially after they've been denied, then I think you could sense a trend and, determine that maybe the attorney general getting involved on some matters has had a chilling effect on the OSSA in its ability to govern, especially on eligibility cases.
Barry, another athlete with the last name Presley is making an impression on offense. Tell us about Braeden-Presley and Bixby, and they scored what, 85 points last week over Edmond North. What's going on with Bixby?
Yeah, Bixby's back to being Bixby. Braeden-Presley, last couple weeks, of course, the Presley name. He's had a couple brothers who were big offensive stars at Bixby, and he's been Braeden has been doing a really good job as a defensive back, cornerback this season for Bixby. He's been primarily focusing on that, but he does have offensive skills, as he's shown the last couple weeks. He'd only had 4 touches in the first 4 weeks of the season. Then he got 4 touches in week 5 and made the most of them. And every time he touched the ball, it seemed like it was a big play. And somewhat the same situation last week. 4 or 5 touches, 2 touchdowns. It just seems like every time he touches the ball, you give him a little space. He's a threat to score anytime he's got the ball in his hands. And I asked Coach Montgomery about it after the game, and you could see that video at our part of our high school coverage, and that's with my game story from last week. And Coach Montgomery said, yeah, now that the temperatures are getting a little cooler, and as far as two-way players, that you can start using them a little bit more on the side of the ball that is not their primary side of the ball. And it's just all about figuring out a way how to balance them playing on both sides of the ball. So I think you'll expect to see Braeden-Presley make even more and more of an impact on offense for the Bixby Spartans. And that's just bad news for Bixby's opponents. Last week, 85 points. Well, the reason, and that's a record for Bixby in a game, and the reason they scored 85, they kept their starters in longer than you normally would in one of those type of games. But that was due to the fact that their opponent, what Edmond North was, they were competing really well with them for the first half. I mean, the first quarter was 13-10. Edmond North was moving the ball really well all throughout the first half and even the early part of the third quarter. So it wasn't like Bixby could totally relax. Edmond North was still arguably within striking distance, although they never stopped Bixby really, except for Bixby's 2 interceptions they threw. So they sort of felt they really needed to keep their starters in longer than they normally would have in that type of game. So that's why that gave them the opportunity to score 85.
I kind of feel like on our show this year, Barry, we haven't talked about Bixby just a ton. We've talked a lot about, Owasso and what they're doing. We've talked about, Jinx's struggles, and now Jinx is kind of rounding into form a little bit. I kind of feel like we've overlooked Bixby just a smidge. What is that, you think?
Well, maybe a little. You take them for granted after 9 state championships in 10 years.
Right? Yeah.
In fact, they're only ranked number 2 instead of 1, and they start off the season with the loss at Owasso. Of course, now we know Owasso is super good. And Bixby, until last week, hadn't really put any flashy numbers on the scoreboard. Yeah, they were averaging, a good number of points a game, but they hadn't scored more than 55 until last week. The incredible stat, I did not know the stat until I looked it up for my game story last week, was that in the previous 2 seasons, they had scored at least 60 points in 16 of their 26 games. That's a wow. I knew they had scored a lot of points, but it just didn't really hit me that they had scored, because for most teams, like scoring 60 is like that's a once a season thing, and Bixby's just doing it in more than half their games.
Who do they have this week?
Bixby's going to Enid.
Oh, okay.
It's not on our picks panel, Patrick.
Well, I
think the panel would unanimously pick Bixby. We're trying to make it a little more challenging in our picks panel this week, after all the people in the panel went 13-2 last week, except Fox 23's Nathan Thompson, who went 14-1. So I'm rethinking the strategy. So you may not see as many 6A1 games that you might normally see, when it's like I think that it's like going to be an obvious blowout, like I think Bixby and Eden's going to be, because normally we'd have Bixby in every week, but this is your bonus pick here from us. I'm just going to safely assume everyone on the panel would pick Bixby this week at Enid.
Probably so. Who should be on upset watch this week?
How about Deer Creek? Isn't that easy?
Oh, that's too easy.
No, um, there's a lot of interesting matchups. For my top 5 games this week are rematches of thrillers from last season. One of those being, of course, the Cushing-Wagoner game I mentioned. So that makes this week really intriguing. And if these games can just live up to what they were, matchups can live up to what they were last year, it could be like the most fascinating week of the season. But I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling for an upset on this, but Chakotah at Holland Hall. How about that? Just because Holland Hall's got such great tradition. And I think that is, for OU fans, that is really an opportunity, like your only opportunity not to have to make a long drive to see Chakotah's really standout wide receiver defensive back, Elijah Thomas, who's an OU commit. So you can just stay in town, go to Holland Hall, and watch him play. That's a really rare opportunity to watch him play and not have to drive 60, 70, 80 miles.
For sure. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. That's a
Most,
great reason.
And let's remind everyone that most of the games this week are on Thursday night. This
Yes.
is the fall break week. So there's only a few games that are on Friday night. The most intriguing one of those on Friday would be Booker T at East Central, because you've got East Central's coach Antoine Jimerson faces the team he coached for such a long time and so successfully in the first part of this century. So, and Booker T is really warming up. So that should be a fun matchup. And also a reminder that the Tulsa Public Schools plus Bishop Kelly Girls Flag Football League opening night is this week on Wednesday at 3 different stadiums. 5 games. A couple of the stadiums have double headers. And so that'll be something to look forward to.
What's going on with fall sports, Barry? The other fall sports.
Got some state volleyball championships in the Tulsa area this week. Don't get a lot of OSSA championships in the Tulsa area, but so you might want to take advantage of this week. We've got most of them. We've got the 3A and 4A state volleyball. Most of the action will be at Sapulpa High School Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, although 3A quarters are at Sand Springs. But volleyball championships are always fun to watch, and a lot of local teams in 4A especially. So that should be very interesting. And then you've got the state softball fast pitch championships in 6A through 3A in Oklahoma City. And we'll see if this is the year for Owasso. Owasso's knocked on the door so many times in the last 5 years with 3 runners-up finishes and 2 semifinals. Great program year after year. They just haven't been able to get over the hump and win the state championship. They've only won 1 in the school's history back in 1995. So will this be the year? That's the big question going in. And in 5A, there's a fascinating first-round matchup between Claremore and Coweta.
Barry, give us a reminder on Photo Day, and then we'll get out of here.
Winter Sports Photo Day is Tuesday, October 29th at Union High School's UMAC, the Red Zone Room. You can drop in. Teams are invited to drop in between 3:30 and 6:30 p.m. All teams are encouraged to bring 5 to 8 of their top athletes. Although this photo day there's a special emphasis on inviting basketball and wrestling and swimming teams. Any football team that missed back in August, our photo day, is welcome to come. And the girls' football teams are invited too. So we'd love to see all the teams out there, and also any spring sports teams that are interested in attending. Since we don't have a spring sports photo day, they're also invited. Again, that's October 29th, 3:30 to 6:30 p.m. It only takes about 30 or 40 minutes to get all the cards filled out and the photos shot. and it really helps us in our coverage, give all the area student athletes the coverage they deserve. And if people see these getting to know you capsules that we've been running in the world this fall, those come from the photo day for the most part. So if you are interested in being featured like that, come to photo day. That really will help your chances a lot.
All right, that'll do it for this week. For Barry Lewis, I'm Patrick Prince. Thank you so much for checking us out. We'll be back next week.